Legend says that Hercules swept Cerberus right off his feet and effortlessly set him down softly as a songbird. Atlas kept the world upon his back, and every day wondered whether he could stand it any longer. And Tara Reade came out to say the man they tried to label the messiah of morality was really just another rapist. And I don't intend to hesitate when asked who was the stronger. Tara, like Assange, knew that carrying the truth would be the hardest labor. Tara knew that her assailant wasn't gonna make us any safer, and knew he's just the type of man to hand a decent foreign leader US printed walking papers, and knew he'd be relentless and aggressive in the war he'd wage upon her very character, that his attempts to weaken and degrade and embarrass her would be her only compensation. But I strongly doubt that anyone could ever have foreseen the stream of hate that came from quote-unquote progressives and the self-styled titans of survivor advocation. So if you really think there's something to be gained out of sharing your pain with the world, you are sorely mistaken. The Biden team just dragged their feet addressing Tara's allegations. Until they had a decent list of smears, then they aired them out on every station. And it turns out no one wants to hear the truth of who they praised as being worthy of such bloated liberal celebration. That no one wants to really know the person they've so valiantly defended, even when it meant they had to gloat and shit all over someone braver than they'd be if given the occasion. Now cue the faceless comment squad invasion. Cue those fuckers crawling out the woodwork to come analyze the way you wore your hair and what you wear. Like your appearance waives your rights, or that somehow you're the reason for your situation. Somehow they've decided you should bear responsibility for what such monstrous men insist on doing. Somehow they're deluded by the empty, hypocritical, and useless fucking platitudes that bastard keeps on spewing. And I think it's very telling that the best of their excuses when they try to come and justify our president's abuses is a hearty butt Trump. In which case I'll remind you that you never saw the news attempt to sell us Donald Trump like he was morally upstanding or a decent human. But when Joe says something bigoted or ogles someone's little kid, CNN says, isn't this refreshing? Biden's like a mix of JFK and FDR with all the finer parts of Harry Truman. Christ, I know that they don't think that we're the brightest, but at least pretend we got a couple lumens. Ask yourself if you have ever questioned what they fed you, or do you just shut your eyes and then consume it? And now ask yourself if you ate every one of Biden's lies under guise of harm reduction and the promise of a slight improvement. And now imagine long ago that Biden chose to show you who he really was by traumatizing you for his amusement. Now imagine that you watched him touch a Bible with those filthy hands, and then assume the power of the highest seat in all the land, of knowing your attacker wields a global coalition born of three-letter agencies who'll make a life's mission out of trying to discredit you through lies, damn lies, and collusion. Big tech is never gonna separate from our surveillance state. Fuck's sakes, they're just a breath away from total fusion. So there will come a time where even if you see the light, your voice will never reach the sky through all the bots and all the noise pollution. So trust us when we tell you that the masking of abuses is perhaps this country's oldest institution. And I know nothing nobler than facing it in honor of the truth when you know that the people holding power have been neutralizing truth since there was wet ink on the Constitution. So know that Tara's truth is something crucial to the movement. And if you see yourself a partner to the revolution, help this country see through all the baseless propaganda through the crux of Joe's illusions. And recognize that Tara Reade gave everything she had so she could tell us what the truth is. Recognize the decent thing to do when someone bears their soul and shows their bruises is not to ask for context or offer up your own solutions. Your job is just to listen with an honest mind and put yourself on Tara's side a moment so you understand the path she chooses. That there is no instant fame worth the dragging of your name. And if that's what you think, you've a lot to learn about the kind of facts the mob can handle and the kind that it refuses. You've a lot to learn about the news and all its many uses. Guess you've yet to learn the truth the news will serve as fruit from which they've squeezed out all the juices. And we all eat the husk and just pretend it's full of nutrients and isn't really useless. But the jaws of our ability to yield accountability are absolutely toothless. So don't you kid yourself that any lips are being loosened. They won't ever tell us where the bodies are or show us where the proof is. It's on you to recognize the lechery our president so regularly oozes. It's on you to muster up some honesty and ask yourself how Biden won your trust, but it's America that loses. Open up your eyes and learn to recognize the bruises. Open up your eyes and learn to recognize the bruises.
They'll gladly pay you by the hour for a minute or so, so you can sign off on the towers where they'll piss on your home. And if you feel like you're just powerless to answer them no, it's 'cause you are. They'll gladly pay you by the hour for a minute or so, so you can sign off on the towers.
Back everyone to Political Survival. I'm your host, Tara. We have a really special show tonight, and I can't wait to get to it. I wanted to, before we do bring on our guest, I wanted to talk a little bit about what just happened with the ceasefire. There was a ceasefire. The last time I spoke with you all, we were all having a really amazing discussion with the publisher of News, and they're continuing to do really good work. So support independent press that is trying to get the truth out there. They need your help. And while I was looking for more guests to talk about this complex subject of geopolitics and all the different shouting and censorship and things that are going online as we're watching humanity basically go down into the bucket, I found a guest that I really admired. And many of you know that my brother Colin is a comedian and did a Showtime special, although his material is not political. He does more stuff. So comedy has always been close to my heart and the people that do it. And, and I really appreciate trying to bring humor to every situation, no matter what, is very difficult, particularly in these times. And so anyone that's able to do it and do it with such grace, I really like that. So this particular guest that I have on today does that and more. And, when I put up that I was having this particular guest, a bunch of trolls came and of course called me a Putin stooge. And they were from Ireland, some of them. And I've never been trolled by Ireland before. And being Irish, that was upsetting to me on a personal level, as you can imagine. So of course I did what I always did. I wrote an op-ed about it, and RT is going to be printing it tomorrow. And I used the word wanker, so I'm not sure it made the cut with the editors. We'll see. RT will accept that, but I did use the word wanker, did some Gaelic, got yelled at and told that I didn't know how to write in Irish. And just so everyone knows, you can write TU for you in Irish, not just THU. And if I have to, I will bring an Irish linguist on the show and we'll have a discussion that doesn't put everyone to sleep about that. But yeah, I did write in the op-ed about other things like that are important about geopolitics and, death and famine and all of that. But the Twitter fight was really upsetting to me. And so I really focused on that a little bit, because it did bring in another journalist, Uisce Beatha, who wasn't even part of the whole conversation. I don't know how he got dragged in, but somehow he was dragged into the Twitter fight. And of course, I defended him as I would a fellow Irish person, and it went from there. But without further ado, you'll see the op-ed. It'll come out, wanker or no wanker in it, tomorrow on RT. I have someone who is an amazing talent. His body of work is really amazing. He has done an award-winning short film that made, had all kinds of international awards and acclaim. He's writing a sitcom. He's done plays. So he's an actor, a comedian, and a very great activist and voice for people who are being suppressed and persecuted in this moment, the Palestinian people. And he hails from Cork, Ireland. His name is Tadhg Hickey, and I'm so honored to have him on the show. Welcome, Tadhg.
Oh, hi, Tara. What a lovely intro. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. And I'm sorry that you got into trouble for having me on your show. And I got into trouble for being on the show.
They were giving you a hard time for coming on my show and saying, that's it, we're not going to watch your work anymore because you went on Tara Reade's show. And I was like, oh my gosh. But that's all it takes. What?
Yeah. Oh my God. I feel like just to touch on that for a second, that the atmosphere on Twitter at the moment, though, I was actually just talking to a friend about it today. It's just at an all-time, and I don't use the word toxic lightly because I don't believe there are toxic people. I think there are toxic energies and toxic feelings and whatnot, but I don't believe people are ever kind of written off. But for the sake of one's mental health, I'm definitely limiting the amount of time that I'm on Twitter at the moment. So it's tough not to take things personally, but for what it's worth, anybody posting anything remotely contentious at the moment is just getting a deluge of abuse. So you're certainly not on your own there. Like,
it's amazing, I only took offense because of the Irish thing, because my background. I mean, like when one of my family members did the genetic thing, that was like all the way back, like we never left the bog outside of 25 miles for like 800 years. So Irish. So I was like, what? Yeah. And there was someone who posted, that she's coming for us. I'm like, no, I'm not coming for Ireland. I can't leave Russia right now because I'm under asylum. So I can't.
You've got your own stuff going on, like, yeah.
So just a bit. So, but I wanted to get to your body of work, which I found amazing. So let's start with your film, which is The Water of Life in Gaelic.
Yeah. Yeah, I was I'm loving that you're mentioning that, yeah, because it's a few years ago now, but it was the first thing I suppose that I did. I was working with a director at the time called Sean O'Connor, and we made it for, I think we had like maybe about 400 quid or something, it was like real, like it was just the idea, and I got a lend of these old costumes, and he's such a creative director and a creative cinematographer that we pieced something together without any money, so we kept shooting stuff that would not reveal the fact that we didn't have any money. And like it won all these awards in the States, and it just went and took on a life of its own. But I suppose even at that age, so that was one of the first major things I'd done. I was in my 20s, and I learned very quickly that it's kind of all about the story. So that's what I've tried to do in my work, that the primary thing is always the story, hopefully the characters as well. You don't have to have a whole bunch of money. Like around, a few years ago, I've done a sitcom with RTE, which is our national broadcaster here in Ireland, and they give you some money. I don't seem to have any avenue to get back in the door with RTE for reasons we might get into. But it's funny, I'm back at a point now where I kind of don't have money again, and I'm still making stuff that I'm very proud of and that I'm very kind of happy with. So I don't know, like you need some money, I suppose, but you got to just do what you really want to do, be authentic about it, and just kind of make it happen. So that's kind of been my work. That short film did really well. I did a play in 2012 that toured Edinburgh, toured internationally. And yeah, I suppose my route into comedy then would be, I'd always been kind of making jokes backstage at serious plays, or I had an acting audition or agent for years, and she'd put me up for these kind of small roles in shows like Game of Thrones and whatnot, and I'd just be laughing my way through the auditions. I just found me trying to be an actor ridiculous, because I suppose I have the soul of a clown maybe. So then it was this slow process to try and get up on stage and demand that people sit down and listen to me shout jokes at them. I just thought that was the most audacious, arrogant thing that you could do. And so there was a process to kind of do that started in 2014. And to move things on a little bit, you know, I had some success in a troupe called Cahoots. We did a lot of work with RTE, as I say. But when the lockdown kicked in, or just before it, I kind of thought to myself, hold on a second now, I've gotten sober. And getting sober is the big part of getting sober is being authentic and being the real person that you are and not pretending to be somebody else. And the type of comedy that I was doing up until lockdown, it was kind of trying to be liked a little bit. It was trying to get people in positions of power to like me in Britain and Ireland, like the BBCs of the world, and not be controversial. Yet my own politics were, I mean, I don't think my politics are controversial in the same way that you don't think your politics is controversial, but it's against the grain, I suppose, and it's not very popular amongst establishment thinkers. So around lockdown time, I thought to myself, I want to do this one-man show about my alcoholism. Nobody's interested in it around me. It feels like it's mad, but I'm going to do it. And then I did that, and it became probably the most successful thing I'd done. And it was touring all over Britain and Ireland, and it got lots of great reviews and won awards and whatnot. And then when lockdown kicked in, I just thought, you know what, I'm going to do the sketch comedy that I've always wanted to do. I'm going to do political comedy. I'm going to take the piss out of the British Empire. I'm going to take the piss out of establishment Ireland. And I'm going to really hit the American empire hard. Because I mean, that's the stuff that I've been reading about since college. And, you know, I'd have conversations with friends of mine, which I'm sure you've had many conversations where, you know, I'd be kind of rabbiting the Chomsky line of America being the biggest terrorist state in the world. And they'd laugh. They'd be like, what? No, America hasn't really done that much bad, have they? Like, I mean, they're not like the real bad states. And I'm like, wow, that propaganda is a hell of a drug. Like, so I thought, look, there's a little niche there for me to follow in the footsteps of all these amazing journalists and writers that I've been reading my whole life and try and contribute to what they're doing with a little bit of comedy. And that really has been my raison d'etre for the last few years. And with that, as you know, comes a lot of people telling you well done and a lot of people threatening to burn your house down.
Yes. But could you tell a little bit of our audience about your book? Let's talk about your book for a second, because I love memoirs. I've written one as well, and I'm writing the epilogue right now because stuff happened up in Russia. But your book is so amazing, and it ties into your one-man show. So Reif, if you could bring up the book cover so people can
thanks,
get it.
guys.
Yeah,
so it's go ahead.
So you bring a book about sobriety to your Christmas celebrations, particularly Irish. I like this.
Yes, it's actually selling quite well for Christmas, would you believe? So I'm hoping to ruin people's Christmas. I mean, that's always been my angle, and I did that spectacularly in my drinking, so I don't see why I shouldn't do it in my sobriety. But yeah, so it's called A Portrait of the Piss Artist as a Young Man. It's a playful reference to one of my heroes, Joyce, whose dad's from Cork. It's important to note that. And yeah, it's my version of my story. Importantly, I suppose, not just about, I didn't want to write a memoir about like a drunk and look at all these funny escapades that I got up to. I mean, there's some funny episodes in it, but I just wanted to write something more than. And then I went on the piss and went to London for 3 days, and I forgot to contact my family because I didn't think there was anything interesting about that. So what I tried to do instead was to focus on the prototype of an alcoholic, like what were the causes and conditions that made me an alcoholic. And I'm hopefully doing it in a playful way, but like a lot of us, like with an Irish background, I grew up in a house with a lot of alcoholism, a lot of dysfunction, a lot of trauma, and hopefully the book doesn't blame anyone. But this is the kind of incubation period that I had, and I felt really anxious and I felt uncomfortable in my own skin. And of course, I wouldn't have used these terms at the time, and I certainly didn't use them when I was drinking because the lads I was drinking with would have been like, what's he on? But I got to a point, I suppose, when I was maybe 15-ish, and I thought, okay, I feel really uncomfortable all the time. At this point, what am I going to do? This is weird. Do I need to go to a doctor or a psychiatric ward, or what's the story? And then I started drinking cans of cider, and I felt no pain, no uncomfortableness. And the bonus was I also felt much more than I ever was to begin with, like a kind of a superhero transformative effect. So the book, in a way, it could have been called Gatman. That was one title we had for it at the time, because Corkish for drinking is Gat. And it's kind of about that superhero metamorphosis from going from an uncomfortable, fastidious kid to a superhero through alcohol. And then from there, it goes so well for a certain period. And of course, then it crashes. And I got to deal with the mental illness that kind of underpins the drinking all along. And that involves a reconciliation with my mother and all that kind of stuff. So I know this sounds extremely, extremely painful, but I do promise it is quite funny as well in parts.
I'm sure it is. And you have a talent for that, for sure. I'm going to ask you a question that I literally, I don't even like it when people ask me this, but it is an interesting question to those of us that are writers or creators of any kind, which is a lot of people. What is your process like with writing a memoir and coming up with your sketches? What's your process? How do you do that? How do you come up with that material?
I think, like, I kind of see myself as a kind of a jack of all trades. So I do lots of different things because I'm interested in lots of different things. I never set out to, one motivation for doing lots of things was the fact that, in Ireland particularly, like, you couldn't possibly survive as an actor unless you're like Cillian Murphy or whatnot. So you end up having to do lots of different things. So I have got a slightly different process for all of them, I think. But the memoir was a kind of a discussion with myself on how best to be honest, because I felt like in recovery circles, I only really connected with people when they talked to me and I felt they were being totally honest. So I thought if I was going to help someone who might be struggling with drinking, or someone in their family who was struggling with drinking, I'd only be able to reach them if I was totally honest. So that was quite easy then. The process was quite easy because I just kind of voice noted a lot of the work, or I just kind of like throw stuff out really untamed, and then I'd fix it all later. So there was a completely different process to what I'm used to. The memoir basically on draft one was a disgrace. Like, it was all over the place. It was just a collection of stories. But if I felt something emote, I'd write it. So at the start, I didn't intend to write about my dad, and then there ended up being a chapter about him. Because I could just see him in my mind's eye. He's no longer with us, sadly. But I could just picture him when I was a kid, and then I just threw all that out. And as I say, redrafted it like 10 times. And that was my kind of process for a memoir. For a sketch, for instance, and weirdly, somebody was asking me about this yesterday, it always starts with kind of close to the full idea in my head. So, for instance, I put out a sketch today called Anti-Semitism, and I thought about like the different modes of propaganda that I feel the Israeli regime uses. And one of them, well, all of them are ludicrous, in my opinion. All of them are actually ludicrous, so they're ripe for satire. So I just tried to look at the anti-Semitism one, and I thought, if you really strip that back, and if it was a bunch of lads chatting and there was one was kicking the head off another lad, let's really strip it back. And what would the opponent say if you presented this fact to them, that if you criticize me kicking his head in, you're actually against my religion? And it's so ludicrous that the actual propaganda does all the hard work for you. Like, they do all the writing for me. All you need to do is just tune into what they're doing. And if anything, a tricky thing with satirizing the Israeli regime is that it's really quite difficult, because their propaganda is so ridiculous. If it wasn't so destructive, and if they weren't carrying out genocide, they in themselves would be hilarious. But of course, it's not funny, the effect of that propaganda. But you know what I'm getting at? It's I'm sending up something that's already sent up. So with that, it'll always come with the idea, and then I just like shape the characters around it. They can be quite quick, to be honest with you, but it's quick now, but it took like probably a few years research so that you actually kind of know what you're talking about and you can tap into the propaganda.
Exactly. You need some historical background and reference, which you provide. Let's do that. Let's go ahead, Reif, if you don't mind, and play. It's a 1 minute one of your one of your earlier ones, near to October 7th, I believe, that went viral. So if, Reif, if you could hook it up for our audience. Thank you.
Dude, what the hell are you doing? Defending myself? What's it to you? You're gonna kill him. Oh my God. Why do you hate all followers of my faith so much? What's happening? You criticizing me means you hate me and all adherents to my religion. I couldn't care less what religion you are, buddy. I just want you to stop beating that guy to death. Ah, you see? Defending him. That means you hate us. That's not true. I detest what you're doing in our name. Well, that's because you hate yourself. Mate, this isn't about your religion. Just be reasonable, yeah? La, 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 la. They're doing it again. Yeah, sorry guys. If you criticize him, you're anti his religion. So. But that's ridiculous. Like, it is a bit ridiculous, isn't it? Want me to tell everyone what you did to my grandparents again? He's right, you're wrong, move along. Oh, and both of you just lost your jobs.
That's awesome. And that was the one you were just talking about. It wasn't the earlier one I thought, but that was hilarious. That was good, but it was hilarious and sad and poignant, but good. Very good.
Yeah. And you were touching earlier in your intro about comedy, right? So I was wondering about doing comedy in this period. And it's funny, right? The people who will be most pious about it. So I've had very few comments, believe it or not, from people saying you shouldn't be doing comedy. Now I've had a deluge of comments saying I'm a piece of shit and I need to die. And hey, I'm a Zionist witch, I've just put a spell on you. I've had lots of comments like that, but I've had a few comments of like, this isn't the time for comedy. And they've all been from Irish people, would you believe it? The absolute majority of Palestinians have been saying, like, we didn't think we were capable of laughing at the moment, but you just gave us a laugh. And that means more to me than anything I can tell you, because to feel that there's some sort of utility outside of the joke itself it's life affirming for a comedian, I think.
I think it's so essential that we laugh at ourselves and just the absurdity of our humanity and the way we behave. And you know, as advanced as our technology is, but our emotional intelligence as a species is just, you know, it's still back with Neanderthals, if you will, as far as each other. And you know, it's not kind and it's not good. But yeah, we need to laugh and also we need joy in our life. We need to find that. And what's been hard for people, oh, you mentioned, by the way, you mentioned the witch. Don't worry, I'm a Celtic witch, so I'll reverse the hacks and you're fine. Don't worry.
Yes.
There's one of my relatives hanged. Don't worry, we're good. We've got you. No, I know. Long story. It was over property, but they made it like witchcraft, but whatever.
Of course, it's over property, classic Ireland.
Yeah, over property defense, right? I liked your premise when you did the one about the shed and the house. And I'm not sure we have that one, but that's okay. People can find it online. That was one of the earlier ones, and I had shared it a couple of times before I had the opportunity to connect with you. And what I really am amazed about this is that how people don't see how this is so much, how the Gaza Strip is so much an open air prison. So let's delve right into Palestine. And I wanted to get a sense from you, what drew you to that activism initially, but also Ireland itself and your community. Ireland is really, really kind of getting behind the Palestinian people for the most part. And it's good to see a country like really, you know, speaking out about it. So let's talk about that before we get into some censorship, which will come later. But could you talk a little bit about that journey?
Absolutely. I would be a fairly proud Irish Republican. And again, it's not like a particularly chic thing. And like Ireland's a funny country, you know, there's kind of establishment Ireland is very keen to not be offensive towards Britain and try to almost paper over the cracks of colonialism and just try and move on from it. Like, we don't want to upset the Brits kind of thing. Funnily, most of my followers are from Britain. So like lefties in Britain have no problem with you taking the piss out of them. They're glorious about it. Again, the piousness comes from kind of Ireland a little bit there, like, but yeah, I think because I have an Irish Republican, I was going to say background, but it's not a background. It's just from my own reading and my own perception of history. And I've got lots of friends, particularly in the North. There's a kind of a connection, I suppose, an obvious connection between Ireland and Palestine when you look at it through the Republican prism. Because you've got the same colonial oppression, you have the second-class citizenship, you have the labeling of a terrorist. You know, so if we oppress you and we take away your rights and we obfuscate so that you can't have any justice, but if you fight back in any way, you're a terrorist. You know, it's so, like, the colonial playbook is extraordinary.
Can I stop you right there? I'm so glad you brought that up, because I brought that up in an interview and kind of got a little pushback for saying I don't believe that, you know, that Hamas is classically, if you look at their history, they're not terrorists, they're resistance fighters, much like my relatives back in the day were resistance to the British. My great uncle Tom was a wildcatter, but he also helped the cause. So I was a Republican by the time I was 8, not the American. He taught me the other kind, right? Because he was from that neck of the woods. But he taught me a lot about the history, right? That came through my family, through a lot of oral songs, whatever. But what I wanted to ask you about is, I was brought up to believe the IRA were freedom fighters, were resistance fighters. They weren't terrorists, but that's the label. And even now, even Irish people that refer to, it's just kind of amazing me. So that vernacular, terrorists, has been, do you think that kind of came about with 9/11 and the American propaganda machine, or how do you see it? Do you see it the same way I do, or differently?
That's interesting. Yeah, I kind of feel like something certainly changed in 9/11 for sure. But I think there's always the tendency to kind of label brown and black people as terrorists if they're resisting, because it tends to be brown and black people that are under the boot of colonial oppression, because it's generally the global south that was colonized in vast swathes. And that's why Ireland is kind of an outlier in Europe, I think, because we understand colonialism in a way that a lot of countries in the global north don't, and certainly other countries in the EU don't. But the labeling of terrorist, I always find it like it's almost amusing. People from the conservative bench, who are supposedly these extremely well-educated people, they don't even question what they're doing when they do that labeling. It's like, this is the government, and this is the state, and this is the terrorist. I was fortunate enough to speak to George Galloway recently, and I was kind of just saying to him on this topic that if an alien came to Earth at the moment and you presented him with the conflict, and you said, look, one kind of entity has murdered 15 to 16,000 people in about 50 days, women, children, it's bombed, hospitals, schools. Nothing has been off limits, like war crimes across the board in accordance with every human rights organization you can think of. And you forgive the alien for assuming that was the terrorist. But apparently that's the state that's using everything it can to avoid civilian casualties. The terrorist absolutely is the group that did this act on October 7th, that we still don't know exactly what happened. We couldn't possibly, and I certainly wouldn't, absolve Hamas of their crimes, but we don't know what happened. You can't have a conversation about it. Like, nobody's allowed to kind of talk about it. I think it's fascinating. So I've always been very skeptical about the terrorism label. And yeah, in my own country, you could find people in my own country right now that would disagree with what you said about the IRA, that would call them terrorists. Or they would interestingly say that the IRA, perhaps of your grandparents, they were good guys. They presumably won their freedom through water pistols. But that the new Nordy IRA are kind of universally evil, because the terrorist versus freedom fighter thing, it depends on the perspective you're at and where you're trying to get your votes and who you're trying to pander to. Because at the end of the day, like, I don't believe, and I don't know, do you agree? I don't believe that anybody is kind of evil. We have to really kind of move away from this kind of monstrification that you get, So immediately after October 7th, Israel was in hot with Hamas equals ISIS, which equals evil, basically. So we no longer have to stick to the rules of the game. They're evil, they're human animals, they're of the jungle, they're of darkness. So we can commit genocide with impunity. I think that's what it's about. So I'm very skeptical about those labels.
I agree totally. And you touched on another thing earlier in the top of what you were saying about the intrinsic racism around it, right? Around what's happening to the Palestinians. It's so blaring. And in the United States, there was just a shooting of 3 young men.
Yeah.
3 Palestinian men, which you probably heard about. And then today there was a child in the West Bank, Palestinian child, that was shot by snipers. And it's like, and a child, I mean, like 7, 8 years old child. And it seems like the world is just becoming numb, or it's because they're Palestinian. And I've been really struggling with it. And when I watched your Galloway interview, actually, and when you talked about the racism, I was like, right on, finally, someone saying it, this is what this is about. I mean, a lot of it, as far as the world or the woke crowd ignoring it, like those people that had the Ukrainian flags in their thing now, don't necessarily support Palestinians. So they'll say, oh, well, you're supporting terrorists or Hamas, at least in America. Now I know in Ireland that's different. But talk a little bit about the racism and Ireland's kind of going through something right now, because you have the migrants coming in and you have people with kind of both narratives happening. How is that all sorting out?
Yeah, I mean, the racism thing is so two things, like one globally, and then I'll
Okay.
get a sense of what's going on in Ireland. So I think I always felt, I don't know, did you agree? I'm a lefty, but I thought that basically the people in positions of power, be they conservative or centrist or whatnot, I maybe foolishly believe that deep down inside they're politically anathema to my beliefs, but they're not like fundamentally racist. Like they're not fundamentally, willing to let people of color die in massive numbers. Maybe I don't know, maybe I was just overly, I don't know, I honestly don't know. Maybe I'm too positive about people or whatnot, but I think the mask has dropped since October 7th. I think Ursula von der Leyen personifies that, where it's basically just, look, they're brown, they're not really us, so they can die in crazy numbers. And then the most horrific, and I actually still feel angry about it just thinking about it, the horrific nature of the likes of Joe Biden saying, well, we can't really trust the numbers. Like, how dare he say that? Because aside from the fact that it's such abject racism, it's so utterly stupid as well, because like for years, the numbers that Hamas have reported have been independently verified as more or less accurate, about as accurate as you can expect from any state like the US or Israel, probably much more accurate than Israel, actually, in the case of Israel. But in accordance with humanitarian groups, independent groups, they've been verified. So either he is deliberately ignorant there, or he's racist, or he's both. And I think it's a disgrace. I can't imagine what it would be like. And I spoke to some of my Palestinian friends about it. And I'm sorry, now I'm actually kind of getting emotional because I think it's just the worst thing. They're going through genocide. Like there's a friend of mine in Cork is trying to get through to his mother at the moment in Gaza. He doesn't know if she's dead or alive. The man is completely, he's got trauma written all over his face. And for him to turn on the news and say, there's 15,000 people of your people who've been murdered, and for the president of the so-called free world to say, I'm not sure about those figures though, I just think is the absolute pits. So I think there's a racism there that I see so clearly now. And in the case of Ireland, there's no way that the British would have gotten away with murdering that many Irish people, certainly not in the 20th century anyway.
Well, they did it with a famine, though. They did it with a famine. Or well, wasn't really a famine. They just simply withheld goods and starved the Irish people.
They
right?
did. They certainly did. I mean, I just don't see them in this century or the last getting away with it. But again, because, and like you make a great point, in that period, Irish people were thought as ethnically inferior by colonialists, and that's another point actually why we understand Palestinians so much. When I saw that that cartoon in the Washington Post, kind of, portraying Palestinians as kind of obsessed with violence and almost like ape-like or animal-like in the depictions, that's straight out of the colonial playbook from Britain, like Punch magazine, where Irish people are simian and they're base and they're deplorable, morally inferior. It's all the same thing. So we were perceived then as Palestinians are right now, but because we're white, we now get a pass, or we have for the last couple of centuries. So I think it's really quite disgusting. And then like for the EU and the States to talk about racism going forward, I think they're done. Like I think most rational people are not going to listen to the lip service of, like, I think, like, didn't the States have something about Islamophobia? Like there was an Islamophobia kind of day or something in the midst of all this genocide. You're like, give me a break.
Yeah, it's the same thing with the other, of course, narrative is anti-Semitism, which you brought up in your in your sketch, that's what people are accused of if they try to lift up the Palestinian struggle. Oh, well, you're anti-Semitic. Well, really? And or you know, like you know, I know Katie Halper, whose grandparents Auschwitz, and she is very outspoken about you know, so you know, lifting up Palestinian struggle, and has for years, like, has been talking about it before October 7th. And that's what people forget. We're in this moment, we're watching this genocide unfold, which is horrific. And I wanted to get to something else because I wanted to ask your opinion of this. My opinion personally is that a lot of this has to do with not religion and not even so much the land grab as the resource grab, which is the gas off the coast of Gaza, the gas reserves, and some of the oil reserves. There aren't as many in that area, but America, reminding people that Israel's 35% of the population has American passports. So it's very intertwined with America. And the Western hegemony wants that resource, it's worth almost $1 trillion, those gas reserves, billions and billions. So so now 85% of the Palestinian people are displaced. So I think that a lot of this allowance of this horrific genocide and displacement is over that, but I could be wrong. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, completely. Like there's a British Syrian journalist, Richard Medhurst, I think is his name. And I won't in any way do justice the incredible work actually he's done on this. He's got an Instagram video kind of consolidating a lot of the research, and he kind of talks about the way that between Israel and the US are trying to kind of create a competitor for the new Chinese Silk Road. So in effect, there's an economic corridor that is being, or is in the midst of being set up. It's all founded, I suppose, on the fact that, you know, there was about to be this kind of Saudi and Israeli normalization deal that was going to kick in. And if that did kick in, because Saudi's the major player in the region, that's the death knell for Palestinian statehood, really. So they're well on their way to trying to create this economic corridor, but to do so, the oil and gas off the coast of Gaza are an absolute must. The moment has passed where the Palestinian Authority were going to get their own. I think they're due like 60% of that oil and gas is effectively Palestinian Authority. They brought in, and I could be absolutely open to correction on this, but they've brought in BP in, I think, the early 2000s, and contracts were signed and whatnot, and Israel have basically just obfuscated and pushed it away for the last, as long as they're controlling the Gaza Strip. I think it's a big part of it, for sure. Like, it's a big economic motivation for the US, without a shadow of a doubt. But just to touch on something that you said, my own take on it is that, and actually you've actually said this with the level of passport holders, I feel like the US and Israel is effectively the same thing. I spent years just like reading and, you know, books and watching videos and trying to get my head around, like, what on earth is this? I've never known a special relationship with it. Like, it didn't make a whole lot of sense to me until you start to look at it through that prism, that they are one and the same thing. I think, didn't Joe Biden famously say, you know, if Israel didn't exist, then we'd have to create a little Israel. So I think it's one and the same thing. So it gets you to understand why that fidelity to each other is so fluid and unchallenged and unchallengeable, because they are one and the same thing, I think, effectively. So that's why they're so embedded in it. I think the travesty is that the US for a long time tried to present itself as an honest broker. And I think now the Arab world finally 100% very clearly sees that's a complete facade, and somebody else is going to have to come into that space, like Qatar or Turkey or whatnot. But yeah, I think the oil is a huge part of it. I think, to touch on the climate crisis, then you'll get people who will be pushing back on the idea of Palestine taking control of its own resources and building its economy in the short to medium term with gas and oil. And I suppose we could have another conversation about that the global north will then be wagging a finger at Palestine going, well, we've moved away from oil and gas, like the US and Britain hasn't at all. And secondly, like, for instance, with India, like, coal has been foisted upon India by the British colonialists, and now they're being given out to because they're holding the world back with their carbon output. You know, it's I don't think we've ever moved past 17, 18, 19, 20th century European colonialism. That's all the world's ills, and it's still going on, just through different neo-colonialism now, I suppose.
I agree with you. That you know, that's well put. That's well put. It does feel like we're still there, because not much has shifted. It's just like the toys that they're playing with have gotten more sophisticated. So let's go to censorship real quick, because I know that's something that we both wanted to talk about. Reeve, if you could bring up the clip from the Irish Parliament there. I think it was from, it wasn't EU, it was Irish Parliament. Could you bring it up? And go ahead and play it. This and to set this up, this was they were talking about making a law about hate speech and having neighbors turn other neighbors into the police. So go ahead and play it.
Addressing the extremist content online like hate speech and incitement to violence. And Cumashuana Man is Ireland's new online safety and media regulator, and will also be joint regulator along with the European Commission for the EU Digital Services Act. My department has ongoing engagement with An Cumashuana, and I, having met them 2 weeks ago, met with An Cumashuana again yesterday for an update on last week's events. And they informed me that they had engaged immediately with the large platforms and with the Gardaí and the European Commission, and that the platforms had activated their instant response plans, and their engagement is continuing. An Cumashuana is calling for those who see hate speech or other illegal content online to report it to the platforms or to An Garda Síochána. This is important, but even more so important in next year. So, because once An Cumashuana is fully operational next year, people will be able to report to them directly if they think a platform has ignored or wrongly rejected their complaint. And these reports can then be used by Cumashuana Man to decide where to focus their oversight and investigations, and ultimately their enforcement action. Finally, An Cumashuana's first online safety code, as provided for under the Online Safety and Media Regulation Act, will be adopted in early 2024. A draft code will be published very shortly for stakeholder consultation, and this will hold the video sharing platforms accountable for how they protect their users online, and will deal with extremist content like hate speech and incitement to violence. This is a new era in which the regulators and the people they serve will be empowered to make the online world safer for all. Thoughts?
I'm going to let you speak first.
You know, I have mixed feelings about all this kind of stuff, to be honest. Like, I feel most people, I don't know if you'd agree, but most people just want parity. Like, they just want to feel like, regardless of where you are on the political spectrum, that we're all following the same rules. So I find it amusing that, like, in Ireland and Britain, the people who have been giving out, to use the Irish phrase, giving out, which is complaining about, you know, cancel culture and whatnot, are now the same people that are actively cancelling people. So, to give you an example, at this moment in time, lots of my content is being taken down. Like, my videos are regularly removed from TikTok. You have Elon Musk, I think, personifies this type of hypocrisy. So Musk kind of came into Twitter saying this cancel culture thing is all wrong. He was against the woke mind virus, I think was the way that he put it. And he's going to bring back all these accounts that had been banned. Generally speaking, I'm okay with right-wing thinkers who have been banned for having, you know, unacceptable views or controversial views. I'm okay with their voices being heard, generally. Like, unless somebody is being actively, you know, terroristic, I suppose, towards minorities, I've got no problem with a political debate from people from all across the spectrum. The problem is, as soon as Musk came in, he starts to, like, ban certain terms and certain language. So at the moment, I think isn't he trying to ban the phrase "from the river to the sea"? Like, accounts will be taken down for using "from the river to the sea." So again, it's that kind of thing of, like, does he see the hypocrisy in it? My angle is, I suppose, from a satirist point of view, I'm going to always do stuff that's going to be contentious. So I'm going to get, as I say, one group of people saying, great lad, thanks for raising this topic. The other group of people saying, we hate you and we need you to die. That's fine. I'd like everyone to be allowed on the internet, actually. It's just people hiding in anonymous accounts, saying threatening things or saying vicious things about others, particularly minorities. Obviously, no one wants that, and obviously that has to go. So the hate speech thing, I'm just not sure, to be honest. I think kind of patrolling speech and regulating speech. I mean, didn't Jordan Peterson make a name for himself on that very topic? And now I think he's part of that kind of right-wing conservative establishment that's trying to quieten voices that are standing up in this particular instance for the most oppressed, the most beleaguered, the most suppressed voices in the world, namely Palestinians. So you can't have your cake and eat it too, Muskie.
Well said, yes.
What do you think?
We part ways a little, just because I agree with you about not wanting people terrorized. I mean, I get terrorized and death threats all the time online. So that's neither here nor there. But in fact, my channel actually 3 days ago was demonetized, the whole channel. Just,
sorry to hear that.
It's whatever. It's par for the course, right? But that's the thing. It shouldn't be par for the course. As an American, we have a constitutional right to freedom of the press. And then you see people like Julian Assange, who is in Belmarsh prison in England because he exposed the empire. He exposed, what they did. He exposed the coup in Maidan and Ukraine in 2014. He exposed war crimes. He exposed droning of civilians. And he embarrassed the American empire. And so even though he's Australian and has never even set foot, lived in America, he is being extradited to America via England. And England is the vassal that it is. It's going to help him go, and facing 75 years in prison for publishing truth. And every journalist worth their salt should be frightened to death by that example. So I feel like this thing that's happening in Ireland is a very delicate thing, because it's like almost like a petri dish experiment. Like, how does this going to go with this population? Because America it's doing it, but it's doing it more stealth. But it hasn't made laws yet where it's going after, people, they're threatening and they're shutting down, outlets and whatnot. So I feel like it's a slippery slope. When you start playing with freedom of speech and censorship, you're going down that slippery slope. Now, do I want, someone telling me they're going to come to my house and kill me? No, of course not. But at the same time, I want public discourse to be able to, like for right now, everyone's that's talking pro-Palestinian, my account included on Twitter has been shadow banned and deboosted so that you don't see my content. When I was trying to do the promo for your show, normally I have a few 100,000 followers, and most of them don't get to see my content because it's suppressed. So that's where it's dangerous,
Yeah.
But I mean, do you agree with that, or do you kind of stand by sort of censoring? I'm kind of full free speech, but that's the American.
No, I totally agree with you. Again, like I feel like it's just the parity thing again. Like if the rules are established, I am for free speech, of course. Like in the case of the Ukraine war, which obviously is a topic close to your heart. Like at the start of the outbreak of war, and really up until quite recently, it was kind of felt, certainly over here, that topic is not open to conversation. I think that's really dangerous. So for a long time, I suppose I'm always looking at it through the prism kind of colonialism stroke American empire. If you look at the Iraq war, I remember the discourse there barely because I was still kind of drinking at the time, but I do remember the discourse that it was like, this isn't open to debate. Like alarm bells straight away. Like Colin Powell is in, he's got a little bit of evidence, it looks dodgy, but no one's supposed to debate it. And now all the media backs it and it's fine. That's tickety boo. Like fast forward to the last couple of years, Russia has invaded Ukraine. They're evil. The Ukraine are darlings. We need to give them loads of money and support. And I hope I'm not being flippant. I'm not being reductive about the loss of innocent Ukrainian lives. But there was a definite connection between my vague memories of the invasion of Iraq and the fact that the media supported that and cheerled it, and there was no debate. Like I don't really remember any debate. Like I remember people on the streets, I remember protesting, but I don't ever remember people on TV having really kind of like meaningful discourse about it. And this time round, I mean, you mentioned Che Bowes earlier. Like, you know, I think in a rational world, Che would be like a hero in Ireland. Like, he'd be a journalistic hero because he's brave, he's gutsy. He does what, like, when I was a kid watching videos and reading books and reading newspapers, I was attracted to journalists that had balls, you know, because otherwise, what's the point of journalism, you know, that would go after stories that other people weren't going after, you know, the likes of John Pilger. I was watching Democracy Now, like, as soon as I could, you know, offbeat, trying to find stories, trying to find the truth, like trying to find the actual story, not just hanging out with someone in a position of power and writing writing their autobiography for them. But actually, Che is kind of like, you know, in an Irish context, he's kind of thought as like, yeah, he's kind of a Putin guy, is he? You know, there's this kind of smell of that he's gone to the dark side of him. And that's actually why I like him so much, is because, again, it's just that authenticity that
yeah, I know him. He's very, very authentic. But the other thing is that's really remarkable about that, and let's highlight this. In Dublin, 2 weeks ago, they had a conference about him, and it was run by an American diplomat from Ireland and a Ukrainian diplomat that were calling him subversive. Had his picture up, had his, he has a family and whatnot. I mean, that's really, I mean, but now he's being targeted not by the British government, but by the American government, and that's a whole other kettle of fish. When you have, and I know this personally as from personal experience, when you have the American government come after you, it is not a joke. It is very scary times. And he's being very brave, and he does really good revealing journalism. And he also revealed corruption in Ireland as well, which I'm sure didn't sit well with some of those folks. But go ahead and go on with
exactly. Yeah, I mean, you're making my point. I'm kind of going like, so free speech is okay to put a target on Che's back. Like, free speech is okay there. But free speech is not okay for somebody using a slur online. So this is the kind of disparity that I'm talking about. Like, there just needs to be something, like, the lefty in me is probably like wanting minorities to not be affected by the kind of bile that we're getting online, you know. So for instance, at the moment in Ireland, there's a kind of a fringe group, and I've got an awful lot of sympathy for some of the kids. Like, you were asking me about this earlier. There's some kids who are being riled up, in my opinion, by a few opportunistic racists, anti-immigrants. And as the immigrant thing would be something that I'm very passionate about. I hate the idea that young disenfranchised kids who don't even know what they're angry about are kind of being sent out to kick up a fuss with balaclavas on. They're going to get a criminal record, and then they've been criminalized straight away. So that's why I'm cautious about the free speech thing, because if we were able to shut down, you know, some of the people who rallied those kids together to go out and do their bidding online, then that would be a good thing, I think. Because I don't believe that they're actually angry about immigrants. They're angry about the fact that the Irish state has failed them. But I don't want to be a pick and choose free speech merchant either. So it's a nuanced thing. It demands a lot of debate. But to finish up on Che, I know I'm all over the place, but to finish up on Che, like you raise it's such a good point, because yes, I feel he has had to leave Ireland actually to be recognised for the superb journalist he is. And that says a lot about Ireland. You know, like, at the moment, we've got a reputation now amongst lefties around the world and Palestinians, which I'm delighted about, that the people are for the oppressed. And I think that's generally true. Like, one of the things the things that I'm most proud of in this whole horrific period is that Irish people are on the streets. There are marches and protests for Palestine in County Cork. Like, I'm talking towns, little towns like Bandon and Mallow, and every corner of Cork is coming out for Palestine at the moment. That makes my heart sing. But the Irish establishment, they're a joke. Like, you know, we've had two parties run Ireland from the inception, the Republic of Ireland, from its inception, that it's just like Little Britain. It's kind of a Little Britain. It's all establishment stuff. Like, give you an example from myself now at the moment, and I'm not saying this to try and show off. I'm just giving you an example on the Palestine thing. This is probably why myself and Che get on quite well. Like, at the moment, I've been interviewed by the likes of yourself, George Galloway, like massive lefty podcasts and whatnot in Britain. I've been on 3 Turkish news channels. I'm going to Al Jazeera next month. Like, they're bringing me over to Qatar to a conference. like a host of other international news outlets, because the sketches have gone all across the Arab world. I have no more been asked to do anything in Ireland. Nobody wants to talk to me in Ireland. There's no establishment show has brought me on. So that this is why the likes of Che will always struggle, because establishment Ireland wants the centrist train to keep on chugging to the station. Don't say anything too bad. I definitely don't shoot anyone in the head, but in terms of changing anything, no, we don't want him. He's dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, well, and you and I have spoken, when we connected, that I'm here in Moscow, Russia. I'm under political asylum from my government because I was a little bit too loud, and I was about to testify against Joe Biden about what he did to me, but not just me personally, but corruption and weaponizing the DOJ and FBI. And more is coming on that case, by the way. I'm still fighting for my rights. But in the meantime, I was granted, the Russian Federation was generous enough to grant me that asylum. So I'm safe here. But, I had a sitting US congressman tell me on the phone when I was here in Moscow, I was going home. I was only supposed to be here for 5 days, and said, I'm sorry, we can't protect you, but your life's in immediate danger. And he was on the intelligence committee, and he said, I'd stay where you were.
My sweet Lord. Like,
so,
I just want to say, whilst we're on, like, I just have so much respect for you and what you're doing. I really do. And like, you're kindly trying to amplify me at the moment now, and I would love to be able to reciprocate, because I just think, I think you're, without being patronizing, I think you're very courageous, but also the way in which you've taken a horrific thing and you're turning it into a force for positivity. I think I'd take my hat off to you if I had one on.
Well, thank you. And that's what we're trying to do, all of us, that are in this space, trying to lift each other up, but also try to push back on this narrative being forced on us, and the consent for wars, endless wars that we don't want, that we don't want our tax money going to, and that we want our infrastructures for our sovereign nations, and that's not been happening. But I think, what really drew me to your material was just, it felt so good to laugh, because I like to laugh. We all do. And I really appreciate, what you've done. So I wanted to ask you, you mentioned a few things that you're going to be doing journalistically. I mean, not journalistically, but, going out and talking activism issue. What are you doing creatively? And what are some of your things coming up? And how can people find you and that kind of thing?
Thank you so much. Yeah, well, to be honest with you, I'm kind of I'm a bit on pause because of what's going on. So I don't usually make this many sketches, but because people are enjoying them, and as I say, I've got like Palestinian friends literally here in Cork that are kind of telling me to keep going. Like, I haven't really done much of my own work for a while, but I suppose this is work too. But people can, I got a website called tadhghickey.com, suitably enough. And there's a link on there if you'd like to buy my book. Next year I'm going to tour again. I might do some gigs actually hopefully in the Arab world. I'd absolutely love to do some gigs. I've got a decent following in Turkey and Jordan. So I'd love to do gigs in the Arab world, or maybe podcasts or whatnot. But definitely I can see an avenue of work in around highlighting Western hypocrisy and doing it through the medium of comedy. And I feel like if I had some sort of a calling, then that's kind of it. And particularly in around racism, because it's just, I still, to just get really basic about it for a second, I still can't get my head round the fact that there's people in positions of power that right now in the world, in the Western world, feel like it's okay for brown people to just be this dispendable, that they can die in these numbers. I just find it absolutely extraordinary, and it's horrific. And I think if white kind of lads in Ireland can do anything at all to highlight this horrific hypocrisy, then that's what they should be doing. So expect many more sketches. I'm on all the platforms right now anyway. I haven't been taken off anything, although I am shadow banned regularly, and as I say, my videos are taken down from TikTok. But I'm going to keep going anyway, regardless, because...
And this is what we do. We cross post things. So we can always put it on our channel, and they and that's how we do. And they take it down. We put it on another channel. So we'll help each other. We'll help each other. But I wanted to say, we are a live show and people ask questions and write in. So Reef, was there anyone that had a question or comment that you wanted to share with Tadhg?
I have heard of it, and I don't know enough about it, to be honest. I'd only make an absolute fool out of myself there now. Oh, yes.
Yeah. Kind of going back to what you're talking about before, because it's where the Silk Road was supposed to kind of end, or it was like
That's it. Silk Road.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. Yeah, sorry, I wasn't familiar with the term, but it's the alternative economic corridor. Yeah. And again, Richard Madehurst has an amazing video on this. I think Netanyahu kind of stood up in the United Nations and basically did this kind of crude marker across the map of the world. And here's where this new economic corridor is going to be. And this happened like quite shortly before what happened in Gaza. How maybe the two things mightn't be directly connected, but there's been something simmering in the background all along. I think you said as well earlier, Tara, that I think Biden at this moment in time is just trying to weigh up the economic interests of his own country and how far he can get away with aiding and abetting and funding genocide. And that I don't think anything sums up the racism of these events more than that. Like, he's kind of going, the American people, they will want us to go into bed with Israel here and create this economic corridor that's going to benefit all of us, arguably. But to do that, lots more Palestinian children are going to have to die. How many more children will die before the American public will go, no, we can't take this anymore? That's scary.
it is. It's been horrific to watch. I've never seen anything like it in my lifetime. I mean, 1.5 million Iraqi civilians were murdered, basically, but it wasn't. But again, we didn't see it the same way. It wasn't on social media. It wasn't in our faces. Now it is, and that's a good thing for us to know what's happening. I mean, it's not good to see it, but it's good to know that there's ways we can reach across the world and try to lift up people that are trying to resist and fight and struggle and survive, and not let them be forgotten and just buried.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'll give you one Irish thing just to conclude that today somebody reminded me that I think there was like about 3,500 people were killed during the entire period of the Troubles. And that is in absolutely no way to denigrate that level of loss and suffering. But the Troubles redefined Ireland and Britain, and we're still trying to work our way out of that conflict in these islands. 3,500, and in 50 days, something like 15 or 16,000 Palestinians have died. Like, and we don't know how many more are missing. I think the scale of it, as you say, is unprecedented for sure.
It is. It truly is. Well, it's been quite an honor to have you on the show, and I really appreciate your time and all your authenticity. I like the work that you do, you know, and the way you reach out to your locals and the way you help the other lads too, as well. I like the way you, you know, everything about it. So, Reif, if you could lift up his book one more time so people could see the book cover and link. And those of you that are watching, you can follow this podcast, replay it. You can also get all of Tadhg's links underneath. You can see and you can click on it. And please follow him on Twitter. And I lift him up often because I need to smile too. And he does a great job of making people smile. So thank you.
Our absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right. Good night, everyone. We'll see you next week. Take care, and may there be peace.